The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
In the meantime, he is one of my favorites. His book is terrific. It's titled Deconstructing Obama. And he did a wonderful piece entitled Mr. Murdoch, Tear Down this Wall. Jack Cashill, good morning.
Hey, Peter, thanks for having me back.
Hey, man, I got to play. Did you see Stephan Olivis yesterday with Huckabee?
No, did not.
All right, I got to play this for you. We've played it for people. Now, what this is, as you know, Steffi has been like next to David Gregory and Chris Matthews and O'Reilly and the rest of these guys, a little pit bull. And we've always played that cut where he covers down for Obama when Obama says, my Muslim faith, your Christian faith. So he, of course, went after Michelle Bachmann. So yesterday, this is just amazing. On Good Morning America appears none other than Mike Huckabee, who is the front runner right now of the Republican Party. Now, what's important to listen to, and then we'll kick back and listen to it, he has a book out now called A Simple Government, and he goes into this whole thing. And Stephanopoulos keeps on him about of accusing Obama of being Marxist or Muslim. So he gets to the end, and he says, and Huckabee says, I don't know why it's so hard to do that. It's interesting, and I thought to myself, you got 12 states who are in debate right now on you must show your credentials. Number two, 51% of the party that he wants to vote for him don't believe the birth story, don't believe the nativity story. So Huckabee, and he just sounds like an absolute doofus. But if I could, please put you on hold so you can hear it. This is yesterday morning. Good Morning America. It's Steffi and the Republican frontrunner, Mike Huckabee.
First sentence of your book is very interesting. You take on those Republicans who say, and anybody who's thinking they're going to get a book about hating President Obama should think again, because you take on all the Republicans who accuse him of all sorts of things, from being a Marxist to lying about his citizenship to being a Muslim. And, we've seen in the last week, I had Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann on the show last week. We saw Speaker Boehner last week on Meet the Press. And it seems like Republican leaders have the hardest time in the world saying simply and clearly, President Obama is a Christian and President Obama is a citizen. Get over it.
I don't know why that's hard. I have disagreements, sharp disagreements with President Obama on almost all of his policies, whether it's domestic in relationship to spending and debt, or whether it's foreign. I think a lot of his foreign policies are misguided and, frankly, naive. I don't dislike the man personally. In fact, I celebrated that in my lifetime I saw an African American elected to the presidency, having grown up in a very segregated Deep South as a child. He's my president. I don't want him to fail in the sense of that I want him to fail because he's a Democrat. I want our country to succeed. I want him to change his policies so I think the country can succeed more effectively.
You think it's smart for your fellow Republicans to keep this controversy alive?
Well, I'll leave up to them whether they think it's smart. I just don't think it's completely necessary for us to delve into such extraneous matters. And I'll tell you, the idea that he's not a citizen, to me, you know why that's nonsense? Because if there was any shred of truth to it, Hillary Clinton and her wonderful investigative opposition research machine would have found it and would have used it. And for Republicans to even be bringing it up, I think it's a waste of energy and time. Okay. Let's focus on the issues with which
now we'll talk about Hillary Clinton, but isn't that interesting? And by the way, he talks about only one-term president. These guys have no sense of history. George Herbert Walker Bush was a one-term president.
Yeah, exactly.
Coolidge, Hoover.
Right, the wonderful Hillary machine didn't even surface the Jeremiah Wright tapes, which would have won her the presidency.
Of course, and they totally missed John Edwards, who was laying pipe on the West Coast and had a kid.
Right, exactly.
So and it was Edwards that was taking the votes from her, not Obama.
What's interesting too is that in April of 2008, Stephanopoulos was on a panel in an ABC debate, and he asked a question to Barack Obama. He said, then he described Bill Ayer's terrorist background, and then he said, "How can you reassure Democrats that this will not be an issue in November if you win a primary?" And Stephanopoulos was savaged by the liberal media for daring to talk about what they call him, this out-of-date old terrorist, this antiquated issue, just like he is now in turn savaging Huckabee for or whoever would raise these issues about Obama now. I mean, he was taken out to the woodshed, and he was a changed man after that. You have to go back and look at the media reaction to that question. And he also raised the Jeremiah Wright issue at that debate, too. And ever since then, he's been chastened and a good boy for the Obama camp.
What's interesting is George didn't correct Huckabee. Huckabee wants to be president of these United States, and he said there's only been one-term president.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, no, listen, we'll play it back for you. And I'm thinking to myself, George Herbert Walker Bush was a one-term president, was beaten by, of course, Bill Clinton.
Herbert Hoover.
Herbert Hoover was a one-term president. I believe there are 12 of them in American history. Now, I just, Sheik, if you would, because I'm so sick of the intellectual lightweights, and Huckabee wants to be the president. He, in this moment, there's 51% of his party, the last weigh and measure, that doesn't believe the story, in 12 states that are debating right now whether or not you have to show credentials, and I believe there are 12. I was trying to go over it in my head when I heard it, and I said, he only said only one. So if you would, one more time, Sheik, it's important. This is how brilliant Huckabee is. There's only one-term president. Sheik, if you would.
First sentence of your book is very interesting. You take on those Republicans who say, and anybody who's thinking they're going to get a book about hating President Obama should think again, because you take on all the Republicans who accuse him of all sorts of things, from being a Marxist to lying about his citizenship to being a Muslim. And, you know, we've seen in the last week, I had Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann on the show last week. We saw Speaker Boehner last week on Meet the Press. And it seems like Republican leaders have the hardest time in the world saying simply and clearly, President Obama is a Christian and President Obama is a citizen. Get over it.
You know, I don't know why that's hard. I have disagreements, sharp disagreements with President Obama on almost all of his policies, whether it's domestic in relationship to spending and debt, or whether it's foreign. I think a lot of his foreign policies are misguided and, frankly, naive. I don't dislike the man personally. In fact, I celebrated that in my lifetime I saw an African American elected to the presidency, having grown up in a very segregated Deep South as a child. He's my president. I don't want him to fail in the sense of that I want him to fail because he's a Democrat. I want our country to succeed. I want him to change his policies so I think the country can succeed more effectively.
You think it's smart for your fellow Republicans to keep this
I think it's in the long form of that.
controversy
Sheik
alive?
backed
Well,
that
I mean,
out and started at the
up to
beginning
them.
where he talks about that the president, because I've listened to this so many times I'm crossing over, but he has $1 billion. Find that part where he said he's going to be tough to beat. He says it's like putting a ladder up backwards, and I think it's in the beginning of the interview. It's the one I've been listening to, and then we pulled it down to that moment where he asks about the religion and his citizenship. So take the long form, and he said it's like putting a ladder away from the wall and trying to climb it. And he says he has $1 billion, and he says there's only one-term president. We'll come back to that when you cover it. So I've listened to it so many times, and Greg Hollenbach, our morning show producer, Jack, has tightened it up to that where he talks about turning it down. So we'll play that before we get out of here. But there were 12 one-term presidents, not one.
You know, and what bugs me about the response, the Huckabee response, is that when it's right away, Stephanopoulos imputes hate to anyone who challenges Obama. Right? You hate him. Right?
We just got an email from somebody who said this woman hates Obama. Yeah,
and they did the same with Clinton, or the things as Clinton haters. But they never attributed hate to those who were...
Hang on just a second. We found it. Jack,
Okay,
I want to do it right here. 11 after the hour. Sheik backed it up with a one-term
Yourself.
president.
How much of your reluctance is related to the calculation that maybe President Obama is going to be tough to beat?
Oh, I think he is going to be tough to beat. I think all this talk that, he's a one-term president, people tend to forget that only one time since 1868 has an incumbent president been taken out who ran for re-election, and that was when Jimmy Carter ran in 1980.
Stop.
Every
All
other
right,
time.
Stop. Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
Yeah, that is just utterly ignorant. You had George Bush, you had Herbert Hoover. They both ran.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah.
Let me just think.
How Gerald Ford?
Gerald Ford. Yeah, I mean he was actually not a full one term, but that's at least three others
sure.
in his lifetime.
Yes. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. You actually said that, and you were allowed to say it?
And no one contradicted you?
Yeah. And I mean, so far, not that I'm I'm no presidential historian, but I'm smart enough to know that there's more than Jimmy Carter.
Right, and boy, I was just thinking back, and I'm just retracing the elections in my head. William Howard Taft ran the second time.
Yeah, and Coolidge quit, so that's out.
Right, but Taft was
Sure.
Post 1868. He ran, and he lost to Wilson and
Sure.
Roosevelt in that three-way race.
Yeah. And so, what are they talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, that shows you the level of sophistication on display here.
Exactly. And then moving into this, how this is nonsense to Huckabee, then how you intend to get the vote of 51% of the Republican electorate in the 12 states who are now in legislative debate about their agendas on who gets to be the man.
Yeah, right.
So
and if you're Huckabee, how do you convince the 51% of the people you've just insulted that you're the guy?
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know. I mean, why didn't George correct Huckabee in a statement? There's only one single one-term president, when there's been 12 in history, and since his turning point there's been many.
Yeah, there's been at least 4. Probably because he didn't know any better himself, or wasn't
exactly
quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
He was too busy formulating his next question as to ways to. And here's what I talked about in the article that I wrote.
Jack, let me do this because I really want to give you the full blast on Murdoch, and we'll take a pause here. It's 14 after the hour. I got to do traffic. 51 will be the high today. This is Jack Cashill, who did the book Deconstructing Obama, and now has done this one, Mr. Murdoch, Tear Down This Wall. Traffic time. Here's Aaron. It is 19 after the hour, 7/7/19, 51 will be the high today, and here we go. We're going on a cruise, and we've done this many times in the past, and this is like the all-timer. We're going to Alaska for 7 days, the Inside Passage of Alaska. We're going with our friends at Cruise Holidays. They're the ones that did the motorcycle trip and the ride to New England and everything that we did to go to Newfoundland. Had a great time. So if you went on that, you know how much this is a kick. It's a round trip from Seattle. Cruise leaves August the 20th and comes back August 27th. Now, act now, because this thing goes. Cruise line is Holland America. The ship is the Westerdam. One of the things we're going to do is whale watch. I got it on my bucket list. I'd love to see whales in the ocean before it's showtime. So you can only book through with our friends at Cruise Holidays of Littleton. Phone number is 303-948-8811. 303-948-8811. Cruise prices start $1,100. 303-948-8811. If you've ever been on one of the things, you know how much fun it is. But we're going to Alaska. We'll see icebergs, calve, and everything. 303-948-8811. Call them today. I want you to hear this one more time. This is the brilliance of Mike Huckabee and the piercing commentary of George Stephanopoulos, and they talk about the only one-term president, Jimmy Carter.
I think all this talk that, he's a one-term president, people tend to forget that only one time since 1868 has an incumbent president been taken out who ran for re-election, and that was when Jimmy Carter ran in 1980.
All right. So here it is, since 1868, but here they are. John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Martin Van Buren, James K. Polk, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, then I think it hits the mark. Rutherford B. Hayes, Benjamin Harrison, William Howard Taft, Herbert Hoover, Jimmy Carter, and, of course, George Herbert Walker Bush.
But other than those 11, he was absolutely right.
All right. So you've written this piece, and by the way, Jack's book is Deconstructing Obama is so worth your time. And now you've written this piece called Mr. Murdoch, Tear Down This Wall. Talk.
Yeah, and it was partly because the book has been out just 1 week today, and it got a great start out of the gate. And it was done thanks to people like yourself, Peter, who believed in the story and it was worth talking about. But I've run into, I have my publicist, my publisher, Simon & Schuster. It shouldn't be that hard. But I knew it was going to be hard because our people, our respectable conservative media, don't want to hear this story. And I start off with an email I got, and I'll skip the name here of the show. It's a nationally rated show. It's a popular, nationally syndicated conservative radio show. It's not Rush Limbaugh, or it's certainly not Rusty Humphreys, who's, by the way, very supportive. But and it goes like this. I write this person, the producer. Mine is the first book to address the birther issue in a serious way. It also addresses the authorship issue. Right now, the book is something of a grassroots sensation. I need to push it up the food chain. And here's the email I received back in full. Thanks for the offer, but we make a point to steer clear of these topics. So where Obama was born or whether the story he told us was true, whether he wrote his books, let's steer clear of those topics.
Sure.
They might embarrass us. Who knows?
Oh.
And the net result of this, Peter, is they think, the argument went, and I've heard this, you've heard it 1,000 times, Well, the Republicans are so stupid that the Democrats are playing us for fools, and they've been playing us for fools for the last 2 years. Well, they lost 63 seats in the House playing us for fools.
Exactly.
And now, but what they are doing successfully, once the Republicans took power in the House, and you hear that, and every time David Gregory talks to John Boehner or Stephanopoulos talks to Huckabee, is why don't you denounce these foolish people? So what they are doing now, they are not making birthers look stupid. They are dividing. They are making our leaders look stupid to the birthers.
Yeah, exactly.
Which doesn't do well for the party in the long run, or the conservative cause. But it may have the effect of weaning out people like Huckabee, who doesn't hasn't paid any attention to this issue, and B, doesn't know his history.
No, it was horrible. I mean, I heard that we played it long term, the long version of it, and it just, my fuse got lit. Now, wait a minute, only Jimmy Carter? And like I said, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I know better than that. And George sits there and looks at him, and Huckabee says it.
Yeah, well, and Democrats don't read history because it's unpleasant for them, so they
or they rewrite it.
Rewrite it.
And you mentioned Orwell in your piece.
Yeah.
And I'm addicted to George Orwell. So how does Orwell's thought fit into this in your world?
Well, because he had in my book I talk about he had a brilliant piece once he wrote on political language and how it's used, and how it often is used absolutely the reverse, so that you say one thing and mean entirely the other. But in this case, and I referred to it when Dick Gregory asked Boehner, "How do you deal
Dave
with
Gregory. Dave Gregory. Everybody says Dick when they're screwing up. It's Dave Gregory. That's
right.
okay. No.
Oddly, just total digression, Dick Gregory, the black comedian, helped me a lot with my Ron Brown book. There was an interesting subset there, but David Gregory asked him, he says, "How do you deal with this ignorance?" That's the word he used, ignorance.
Mm-hmm. The ignorance about, and when it's out of context, but it's in Meet the Depressed.
Right.
And Gregory asked Boehner, about, won't you say these things? And in fact, as I thought, it was a moment where this talking head of the mainstream press, one of the guy who fills the shoes of Tim Russert, is actually telling people don't ask questions.
That's right. Do you think do you not think it's your responsibility to stand up to that kind of ignorance, is what Gregory asked him. Now, that's why I said, where's George Orwell when we meet him? Because the media are at great pains to not know anything about this, They don't want to know. They don't want anyone else to know, and yet they accuse those who know or want to know of ignorance. And you sit there and saying, how much more bastardizing of the language can the local media say? That's why I don't watch any Sunday morning TV. No. I just can't stand it.
But it's fascinating because Gregory now has done it 2 times, and I said,
twice.
And I've told you I knew him during the Ramsey investigation. Didn't know him, but he's a fruit fly. I mean, he's no intellectual giant, but Orwell writes that newspeak. He doesn't call it political correct thought, but it's newspeak. But he said it is the only language that gets smaller every year. I think I love Orwell, and I'm rereading his essays, but he said the language gets smaller every year with newspeak.
Well, he's a great story because he started out as a hardcore leftist.
Well, absolutely.
And he went to the Spanish Civil War.
That's right.
But what he learned there, and the Spanish Civil War was indicative of what's going on now, is that they simply made stuff up.
Yeah, of course.
They made whole battles up.
Sure. But all of those guys that came out of England after, that wrote, Orwell was one of them, and the rest of those guys who
Arthur
came.
Kessler
There's another one.
Right.
Yeah, and they were brilliant guys, and they took those guys on. And Orwell was really primarily writing, obviously, about the Soviet Union. People thought he was writing about Nazi Germany. He's not. He's writing about the Soviet Union. And that's really where the term political correct comes from. It comes from Trotsky.
And here's the quote from Orwell that I use in a book. He says, "Political language was designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind."
Yeah.
And that's exactly.
Remember when Ron Ziegler was one of the greatest moments when they catch Nixon, and Ron Ziegler said what the president said was an untruth. And I thought,
a lie, mind
that's
you.
not a lie. It's an untruth. Yeah. So you focus now. I mean, by the way, I don't know if we've spoken since Karl Rove appeared with Bill O'Reilly, and they were, I'm the one that discovered. No, I'm the one that discovered it. Have you been on the show since that moment?
Yeah, I think so. And that was just your classic moment in shared stupidity.
And what's Karl Rove about?
Well, but he's a very smart guy, by the way, but he doesn't understand people that don't wear suits and meet in $1 million houses to raise money for his candidates.
Yeah, I think they get stratified.
That's where I met him, by the way.
One of those deals. What about O'Reilly? I mean, has O'Reilly become an apologist? Is he dancing close to the flame so he loves the power?
What they all share in common is the fear of being thought a kook at a Georgetown cocktail party. I mean, it's no deeper than that.
Yeah.
I wish it were, but that's about as deep as it goes.
So they don't. O'Reilly is. I've had conversations about O'Reilly, but I mean, this is a guy. What? Let me do it. Is your time good?
No, I got to run right now.
Okay, then I knew got to take. Why won't Murdoch tear down the wall?
Because I would say this is that they cling to the notion that they're still respectable. The fact of the matter is, though, that the left hates them as is. They think they're buffoons as is. And if they got a little more edgy, not only would they increase their ratings, but they would have a more legitimate avenue to actually participate in the creation of news. Right now, what they do is they defend and they nuance and they comment on, but they don't create real news, and that's unfortunate. So that's why I'm taking my story now to the National Enquirer, because they're the only people left who do actual reporting.
Well, they're the ones that busted John Edwards. Sure.
Right, that was an easy one,
Yeah.
and we saw how the major media simply did not want to know about that.
And I love that Huckabee, and Stephanopoulos, where they could have the Clinton machine, but the Clinton machine didn't do Reverend Wright. The Clinton machine did not do John Edwards, who was taking the votes, not Barack Obama.
That's right. If they had done right, Hillary would probably be president today. And actually, I'm just so glad Obama's president. So
same thing. If they'd have outed John Edwards, who's appearing on The View crying with his cancer-ridden wife,
right.
Say, oh, by the way, what about this blonde videographer out here that's 2 months in the oven?
Yeah, right.
Not so fast. God bless, Jack. Thanks.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
And we come back after this on Open Line, 630 KHOW.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.